The first, he noted, he and his ohana have practiced fishing, gathering, drinking, and bathing practices, and he's talking about the southern portion of the Keoho Aquifer, around Kahaluu, where the flowing freshwater springs, the blackish water pools, and Opai Ulabur, not to mention the Vana, the lobsters, and octopi. He specifically noted that these flowing freshwater springs, brackish water pools, and Opai Ula are gone, or at least not easy to find. They've been slowly diminishing since the Kahului well was drilled in 1975. So I've seen nothing in the intervening months since that testimony was submitted of anybody controverting that there's already been an impact from existing management practices in this area on traditional customary practices. He also went on to note that his cousin Connie would actually take him up to the area that's now Kolokohonoko. He'd point out the critters in the tide pools, the plants for drinking, Douglas and ice water pool, point out the fish shrines. And for him, it was a very reasonable conclusion to say, okay, when I was a kid, had plenty of resources down south, then they started pumping, they went away, now they're moving the pumping to the north. I'm concerned that these practices are going to go away too. I'll talk a little more later about why we don't have, in great detail, long lists of practices and practitioners. A few that we mentioned as existing practices, there's annual ceremonial cleansing that occurs within the park. Annually, people take water from Koloko and Aiopito to share with other fish pond practitioners around the state. There's been a number of requests by practitioners for water, to ceremonially gather water from the Park Service, which have been granted. We haven't interrogated them about what it is that they're trying to do. And most significantly, and Paula started to talk about this, and I've had pictures up, after the years that it took to gain the land for the park, and then the many years that it took to rebuild the fish pond wall is now in a state of active management of the fish pond to bring it back into production has begun. And there's monthly work days where people are going in, cleaning vegetation, getting prepared to put that back into use as a traditional aquacultural food source. And I'm sure people in the audience here today might testify on that. This is one of the pictures of the many work days that have been held. What's the NPS's management of traditional and customary practices was one of the questions you asked. And the National Park Service is not the National Security Administration. We don't run around with clipboards, seeing somebody doing something and saying, oh, can you check out, are you Hawaiian? What is it are you gathering? How many are you gathering? Are you doing this all the time? They're not there on the ground 24/7 at nighttime where some practices occur. It would actually be antithetical to the idea of Kolokohonoko Hau serving as a pu'uhonua, for there to be this rigorous data collection program on what practices currently exist. That's not to say, and no one that I know of in the Park Service would disagree, could we do more to support traditional customary practices? Absolutely. When I talked to Fred Cachola, one of the last living members of the Advisory Commission, you know, in 1972, when the development proposal existed that was going to destroy this place, the Trust for Public Land wasn't in Hawaii. The Nature Conservancy was not looking at these kinds of properties. The state of Hawaii was not looking at trying to protect these properties. OHA did not exist. There was no Hawaiian Islands Land Trust. They turned to the one entity that they thought might actually help them, that had the resources to have the management. And they knew it's going to be tough. And in fact, of the many Park Service units that exist around the country, you know, many of these rules and regulations are made in Washington, D.C., and they're not made with the idea, thinking about, well, how is this going to affect a traditional gathering at Koloko House? So it's not perfect. There's improvements that need to be made. There can be tension there. But it's very, very clear that the core purpose of the park is the perpetuation of practices. There's been a number of very significant efforts continuously since the founding of the park to make sure those occur. And the work days really illustrate that very well, how those ongoing and future practices are going to occur. This is a photo from December. You seem very focused on quantification. So I wanted to quantify a few things for you. 9 years. 9 years has been the number of years that the Park Service has been having conversations with the Commission asking you to take some protective action to protect traditional and customary practices and resources. You approved the Hawaii County's Water Use and Development Plan for the island. It's 492 pages long. The number of times that the phrase public trust appears in the 492 pages is 0. And that's the document that's supposed to be guiding water development on this island. Once, the phrase traditional and customary native Hawaiian practices appears, and that's because you're quoting the state water code. They were. When we presented our petition in September 2013, and it was heard in October, there were 3 commissioners, 2 who still serve on this commission, who were ready to dismiss the petition without it having even any staff analysis. And 0, as far as I know, is the number of times that the Water Commission has conditioned a well construction and pump installation permit on its impacts on traditional and customary practices in this area. So we have a WetUp update. I'm very glad that this update for this area is going to specifically look at traditional and customary practices, and that's going to be discussed today. You've received our reports. There's some conditions, discussion. Perhaps the Water Commission might put conditions on well construction and pump installation permits. But the question remains, can it be done? It still remains very unclear whether there's any legal powers of the county to manage water whatsoever other than water in their own systems, and whether there's any ability outside a designated water management area that you have to put conditions on to fulfill your duties. So what comes next? These are some of the people who come to exercise in the park, to try and carry on traditions. They and we are turning to you.